The Journey of an Apprentice Pilgrim, Series Divine Footsteps. Book 1, written by Felipe Chavarro Polania, narrated by Louise Robinson, Brian Wilson, Christine Stevens, Otoniel Lewis, Marcus Burton, Luke Harris, Martin Payne, Michael Owen, Maxie Holmes. Chapter 1. The Awakening. Kadmiel was born in Bosum, located northwest of Hadar, which was known to some as the Kingdom of Sheba. Bosum was a rich province in many ways, with a mixture of cultures and ethnic and regional specificities that gave rise to a myriad of different customs. In addition to this great richness, the province had a diverse climate and landscape due to its diverse regions. For this reason, the province was held in high esteem in the kingdom, as it was considered to be the lungs for the whole of its land. Bosum was famous from north to south, and from east to west, as it had a wealth of natural resources and a privileged geographical location. However, despite its great wealth, Bosum was a country that struggled to stay afloat, for poverty was the greatest evil that afflicted its people, keeping them in stagnation and limiting their ability to progress and achieve success. So much so that poverty was considered by the citizens of Bosum as a deity that was responsible for bringing almost all men to ruin, regardless of their efforts to progress. This deity, as many believed, was the inseparable companion of violence, and by the sovereignty of both, Bosum was plunged into great confusion, corruption, and poverty. It was in this beautiful nation that Kadmiel was born, a little boy who from his childhood faced the same limitations as other children of his age. When he was only 5 years old, his father and mother went their separate ways, so Kadmiel was left in the care of his mother, who decided to move to the place where his parents lived. Kadmiel quickly forgot his father's absence, because his mother Sima, his sister Yana, and his grandparents Raphael and Batia were always with him. Kadmiel was a very curious boy, for while his mother went out to work, he used to sit next to his grandfather, and while the latter rested on a balcony at the top of the house, Kadmiel would persistently search for the answers to the questions that every boy has at an early age. As time went by, this practice became a habit, to such an extent that Kadmiel and her grandfather would talk for hours about the experiences that her grandfather had accumulated over the years. Kadmiel becomes an apprentice. So after a few years, Raphael, seeing the boy's shrewdness and the attention he paid to every story he told him, turned to Kadmiel and asked him,
Kadmiel, if you were told that your grandfather a few years ago was very rich, would you believe the person who told you that?
The boy smiled faintly and shook his head, and staring at his grandfather, he said,
Dear grandfather, although I admire you, I wouldn't believe them.
His grandfather, admiring his sincerity, paused and then continued.
Many years ago, when your grandmother and I were just starting to build our home, I was in search of a business that would give me the time and income I needed to build my home. In this way, I could ensure that gold and silver would not be in short supply, and I could look after your grandmother and the affairs of the household. It was then, after much searching, that I found a position as a pottery merchant in a business that was prospering rapidly in the city of Mayan. Time went by and my hard work began to bear its first fruits, so much so that I found grace in front of the business owners who, seeing my effort and results, decided to put me in charge of all their affairs. As a consequence, I was given the power to make decisions without even consulting them. It was then that I felt that my long search was finally over, and I could dedicate myself to the business without reservation. After a couple of years, I became a partner, even to the point of buying out the former owners. At this point in my life, I felt very fortunate, as I had amassed a large fortune. Despite this, I did not feel fulfilled, as I felt very strongly the absence of my former partners and friends, who were always ready to guide me and offer me their friendship when I needed it. Over time, this absence began to overwhelm me. So I started to surround myself with bad friends, as I was looking for new friends with whom to share my successes and doubts. But I did not succeed in my search. At first, I met a man named Mordecai, He was a guy given to wine and a cloying talker. In the beginning, we used to stop a lot in bars, and we used to look at the glow of the color of the wine in the glass. In this way, my reason was diluted by the passing of each glass, and for a period I lived only to push my elbow. I staggered into the arms of your grandmother, who patiently waited for me in that time of debauchery and fainting before my vice. It was then that your grandmother warned me that if I continued with this friendship I would end up in ruin. But my arrogance was stronger than my desire to listen to her. Some time later, this man, upon learning of my possessions, made a count of all of them, and in the company of a man called Nadir, they managed with many tricks to strip me of all of them.
Hearing this, Kadmiel was filled with sadness and, shaking his head, said to his grandfather,
I don't understand, dear grandfather. How did all this happen?
Listen carefully, my son, for if I have no other opportunity to repeat these words, if you retain them in your heart and keep them in your mind, my mission will be accomplished. By enlightening your mind with this flash of wisdom, listen to the counsel of your wife and loved ones and accept the correction of those who love you well, so that you may be wise all your days and retain what is yours. For poverty and shame shall be on him who despises the counsel of those who love him and who are wiser in the way of life. But he who keeps instruction shall be honored before those around him. Be wise and avoid falling prey to any vice, remembering that counsel often changes its garb to show itself to men as a warning. All this happened, for in my arrogance I disregarded your grandmother's warning. For when in the company of these men I lingered at the wine, and while it gnawed and glistened in the cup, I lost my understanding and my wisdom. At last, like a serpent, their poison intoxicated me, and my eyes beheld strange things. In my drunkenness, my heart spoke perversities, so that even my house I pledged my oath, and with my pen signed my sentence. As a consequence, even the pillow on which my head rested I bestowed on strangers. For this reason I urge you today, my son, to become a learner all your life, so that you never stray from instruction and heap up understanding for yourself. This, then, is the doctrine that comes out of my experience, so that you do not despise it and give your ear to its wisdom. Incline your heart so that you do not despise it. Do not turn away from it, lest you be as one who lies in the midst of the sea, tossed about, and say that life has beaten you down, and seek prosperity and find it no more. Become, my son, a learner. Accumulate knowledge, so that discernment and intelligence may be thy favorite friends, and surround thyself with those who eagerly seek counsel to firm their steps in the way. Therefore, whatever comes to your hand, whether on tablets or on papyrus, read it so that you may retain the good and discard the bad, so that you may be wise among men, and not err by repeating the experience of those who erred for lack of understanding and experience. If only today I could turn back the hands of time, I would have retained the counsel of my mentors and would have retained thereby my possessions. But the wealth of counsel I transfer to you today with my teaching, my dear boy. For if you keep it with humility, it will preserve both you and what you possess. This is my teaching, therefore forget it not, my beloved Kadmiel, and be henceforth an apprentice to thy last breath.
After this teaching, Kadmiel's eyes filled with tears, and as he hugged his grandfather, he resolved in his heart to become an apprentice until his last breath. After that evening, Kadmiel felt that his life was different, for his grandfather's words and each shared experience echoed within him so vividly that he felt each teaching as if it was his grandfather's experience. First glimmer of wisdom. After this, it being night, Kadmiel lay down on his bed, and looking up at the stars, he declared,
Today an apprentice is born within me, for my soul has gladly tasted the teaching of my old man, who for years has kept his counsel for me to take without difficulty or delay. Today I wish to preserve my grandfather's wisdom, to straighten my heart as I walk the path that has been reserved for me. Why should I let myself be deceived? For evil companions troubled my old man, afflicting him with great distress and despair. I will pay heed to those around me so that my foot will not stumble. I want to walk my path upright and not stagger along it senselessly. Today I begin my new life as the apprentice of the wise. I will seek them persistently in my pathway to find good counsel and to avoid stumbling at best. Today, all creation shall testify that I have received the doctrine of an elder, which is but the seed of true success, which has been carefully contained by wisdom and experience. No matter what career I choose, my path will be strewn with seeds of success and opportunity, which have been carefully disguised in the garb of counsel and warning. In this way, only a true apprentice will be able to decipher, dust off, and treasure each seed that is given to him, to gain its profit, which is more valuable than gold and silver. I will arm myself with humility, that every counsel may sprout with success, true prosperity, and fulfillment within me. My old man has drawn from his treasury this doctrine, that I may be kept from wretchedness and despair, and not join the corpses of those who have failed to heed counsel and admonition. So many have fallen that they could not be numbered. If only they had understood that we are learners from the beginning of our lives until our last breath, surely they would not have failed, and their souls would not have gone astray forever. By the humility with which I shall henceforth arm myself, I shall retain instruction, so that success and absolute prosperity will be my reward. But how am I to achieve this? What skill will I need to develop to do so? The answer to these questions is simple, for although I am still a young man and do not need a great deal of experience, my only skill so far has been that of listening carefully to the experienced. For this very reason, I will need the skill to begin my journey with a great advantage. With my soul, I will desire to treasure advice, so that I will never forget to listen carefully to my mentors. I will honor those who surpass me in age, and as long as the breath within me lasts, I will give my undivided attention with diligence to those who grant me counsel or warning. But how can I distinguish good advice from charlatanism? The answer is somewhat elementary, for advice cannot be information without an experience to back it up. Why do I know this? Because experience turns information into wisdom. If advice is shared with me and it is a failure, I will heed it if it has as its foundation an imprint on the character of the one who experienced it. But if it is a success, its possessor will not be able to hide the results of his great deed. By this I shall avoid charlatans, and not fall a prey to deceivers, who attach extravagant value to information. Finally, I am to honor the aged, for in them is wisdom, and understanding is treasured only with the passing of days. For when a young man errs in his way, and suffering punishes his back in retribution for his fault, when he is old, will not the marks on his soul be a sign that he has gained understanding because of his suffering? Therefore, from the length of years of the old man, counsel and understanding will flow as from a wellspring. I have but to lend my ear to his words, so that like my palate, they may taste the savor of true knowledge, which nourishes the soul, so that it is nourished to maturity.
After this meditation, little Kadmiel listened to the bustle outside the house, and when he looked at the clock, he realized that the time had passed. So he slouched down on his bed and went to sleep. After this teaching by his grandfather, Kadmiel's relationship with the old man grew closer and closer, to such an extent that his grandfather shared a great deal of experiences with Kadmiel, and Kadmiel treasured with amazement all the teachings that his grandfather gave him, the immortality of advice and instruction. 2 years passed, and things changed between Kadmiel and his grandfather. Morning after morning, Kadmiel began to notice that his grandfather's strength was waning, as his embracing voice had lost its warm tone. In this way, his old man was losing the impetus to recount his travels, and Kadmiel's eagerness to listen to his grandfather could not be assuaged in the same way as it had been yesterday. And so the days went by, and the old navigator of life could no longer keep his appointments as he was accustomed to, for the immense burden of an illness gave him no respite from being the same as before. So it was that Kadmiel looked for his grandfather's face every day when he got up, and when he couldn't find him, he said to himself,
"Tomorrow, I'm sure will be a better day."
Although now he understood that something strange was happening, but nobody would tell him what was happening. One fine day, Kadmiel sat at the table, pushed the half-eaten bread around, and began to think about his grandfather again. That morning it had been 4 months since he had heard his stories. As he thought, he didn't even hear the noise around him in the crowded dining room, and he stared grimly at his unfinished meal. The doubts that had plagued his mind since the beginning of his grandfather's convalescence were once again running through his mind.
Why doesn't my grandfather regain his strength? Will I ever meet him again?
Some time later, Kadmiel got up from the table and went to the top of the house. this time with a great hope that he would find his grandfather there. Suddenly, he saw his grandfather waiting absorbedly just beyond the entrance to the balcony.
"Hello, grandfather,"
said Kadmiel as he reached the place where he stood. But the old man bowed his head slightly and continued in silence. As they sat down, it was difficult for the old man to hide his concern, so it became clear to Kadmiel that something was happening. As they sat there, the intense aroma of the great celebratory feast her grandmother had prepared that day wafted through the air. Then his grandfather turned to Kadmiel and said,
"My dear grandson, how long has it been since we last spoke?"
Kadmiel, with a sad face, said,
4 long months have already passed.
His grandfather smiled and gently took his hand and asked,
"Have you been able to retain in your memory the most important teaching you have received since you began to listen to my stories?"
Kadmiel wrinkled his forehead for a moment, signaling that he was making an effort to remember, and after a moment his face lit up and he began,
Although there have been many stories and teachings that you have shared with me, the most important one has been to make me a lifelong apprentice.
His grandfather nodded and stretched out his arms to Kadmiel and said,
"Are you willing to become a true apprentice for life?"
Yes, sir,
replied Kadmiel enthusiastically.
"Let me then encourage you to treasure this in your heart, and to add to your understanding this which I will explain to you. For I am now an old man, and my needs are simple, and I feel that my career is over. It is my wish to add that my failures and frustrations were not only the product of the absence of counsel in its time."
Kadmiel started to interrupt, but his grandfather's loud signal forbade him to be silent.
"Besides being an apprentice and admitting the counsel, on no account undertake or launch an enterprise without wise counselors to guide you. Do you find this teaching difficult to live up to?"
The young apprentice shook his head, and with a smile said,
No, grandfather, only I do not easily understand your reasoning. For your words have changed their accustomed tone and sound like those of a man going on a long journey.
You have been my companion in dialogue for these many years, and now that things have changed, shall I not take advantage of my time now to give you another conclusion from my experience?"
Then Kadmiel hugged his grandfather as a sign that he had missed him, and replied,
I will give my full attention to your teaching, my dear grandfather.
Then his grandfather went on to say,
"Remember, my son, that if you go on your own, you will surely stumble for lack of a good partner, who with his advice and ideas will give you practical help to achieve your desire. For though you may be diligent in all your affairs, if you have not treasured partners and trusted advisers, your career will sooner or later be frustrated."
For a moment the old man paused, and crossing his arms a little, he looked steadily at the boy. Kadmiel, staring at his grandfather, asked,
In what way should I seek out my partners or advisors? And how shall I avoid unsuitable partners?
The old man reached into his pocket and gently pulled out a small white pebble, which looked very different from anything Kadmiel had ever seen before. Then the old man asked Kadmiel,
"Have you ever seen a white pebble like this in the yard or in the park while you were playing?"
Kadmiel nodded his head in agreement. Then, gently placing the pebble back in his pocket, he solemnly continued,
"Just as this white pebble is not easy to find anywhere, good partners are hard to find, and you will need great discernment to find them."
Then the boy, shaking his head, burst out and say,
It doesn't seem to be a task that anyone can master.
Then the old man, responding, said,
The search becomes easier as long as you are willing to pay the price in terms of time and attention to identify the signs that differentiate good partners from bad. Remember that the conventional and ordinary can be achieved without even looking for it. This is why those who fail always apply conventional wisdom and follow the same instructions as the crowds. Now then, my little apprentice, to begin with, I will tell you the reason why I showed you the little white stone I have in my possession. For it was not I who found it, but it found me first. I just had to arm myself with patience and wait for her arrival in the right place. It was summer, and a great wind was blowing in the city of Ness. I had recently been transferred to this city at the request of my partners to start a new pottery market, the first one to be exact. To start the work, I had to search the town for a reliable man to help me find the site of the clay deposits. I was young and inexperienced, so I didn't know where to start looking to find him. It was then that I began my search, asking around the crossroads and the squares of the city. Then suddenly, amidst the murmurs and gossip of the crowd, a man named Abir came out to meet me. He was an intrepid man and a very flattering speaker, who with an abundance of words offered to show me the way to the sights. At first, he guided me through an inhospitable place, where, according to him, we might find new deposits never explored before. Until one day we were removed from the place, because exploration work was not allowed there. The days went by, and the gold that had been entrusted to me was becoming scarce. So at dawn, I met with Abir and resolutely told him, "Abir, if today we do not succeed in our search, I will have to dispense with your services and return to my place of origin." Abir put his hand firmly on my shoulder and said, "There is no need to worry, my dear Raphael, for I am told that near here they have found a deposit of white sapphire. With a little gold, we will begin the exploration, and when we sell the sapphire, we will share the proceeds, and you will soon refresh yourself satisfied under the shadow of wealth." Having said this, I gave him the gold I had left, and he left. I thought long and hard about his promise of enormous profits in return for that small amount of gold, and soon more than repaid my imprudence. For the deposit turned out to be nothing but a fable, and with it my gold vanished. So, after my failure, I returned home, and a few days later my partner Avi came looking for me. Avi was my mentor, a man twice my age and of great wisdom of character and speech. As usual, he greeted me warmly, and we sat by the balcony. Looking me straight in the eye, he asked, "6 months have passed since you left. My son, have you prospered on your journey to Ness?" To which I answered disconsolately, "I have failed in my journey. The gold you entrusted to me has vanished, and the clay deposit I have not found." Avi was silent, and with his gaze ingrained in my face, listened attentively as I told him the details of my journey and how I had fallen for Abir's trickery. When I had finished my story, the old man smiled and said to me, "One only learns by blows when one is inexperienced, and he who listens to the flatterer and the liar will work his own ruin. How could you trust your journey and its purpose to a man of flattery and lack of integrity? Now then, would you go in search of the one who knows of sights, amidst gossip and the noise of markets and squares? Surely not. If you had thought carefully, your feet would have led you to the clay deposits. That is why your journey has not prospered, and the gold in your purse has vanished. You have paid dearly for the price of heeding the false counselor." After saying this, he took his leave, saying, "I will return in 12 days, but this time I will accompany you on your journey. Take care to arrange your house and your affairs, so that you will be ready when I return."
Then Kadmiel said to his grandfather,
I want to know every last detail of your story, my father. Please don't leave out any details.
The old man gave a great sigh in an effort to remember, and concentrating, his thoughts stretched retrospectively through time. The signs of a true partner or advisor. It was almost 2 weeks since young Raphael had returned from searching for clay deposits in the city of Ness. It was a hot morning, and Raphael was impatient for Avi's arrival, when in the blink of an eye, on the horizon he could see the old man, who at a slow pace was approaching the place from where they were to depart. Once in front of him, the old man remarked,
"My son, you have had many days to re-examine your actions. Do you wish to make up for your mistake by having prosperity on this journey?"
"That is my greatest wish,"
the young man replied in a voice full of awe. Then the old man nodded his head and signaled for them to depart. They hastily saddled their steeds and set out on the road that would take them to the town of Ness. As they rode on towards their destination, the old man did not utter a word, so the song of the birds and the sound of the rushing winds that beat greedily over the hills became more and more relevant. As time passed, Raphael took the opportunity to organize his thoughts until he found the voice of silence difficult to bear. It was then, in an attempt to interrupt the voice of silence, that he cleared his throat and opened his mouth, saying,
"Why so much silence?"
To which the old man replied with a smiling gesture,
"Even in silence there is fruit, my son, for in silence and stillness a man must look at his failures with a magnifying glass. In this way he can know his teachers, and by taking their teachings he will regain confidence and firm his steps. Only thus can success be reaped, my son. Always try to meditate on your mistakes, and like the wise man it will happen to you that every failure will precede a success.
Having said this, the old man continued in silence, and turning away, fixed his gaze on the horizon. The young man then turned around, and as he rode his steed, he was again immersed in his thoughts and understood the reasons for the old man's silence. Some time later, the young man concluded inwardly,
Today I understand that there is no substitute for silence, when the wise man has to extract the hidden treasure of his mistakes. I will extract the value of my failures and mistakes, for they are my greatest teachers.
Having said this, the young man perceived the bright sun shining on his face all the way. The journey is prosperous. Later, the trees had arrived, openly heralding evening, and with it, Raphael and Avi entered the walled city of Ness. As they entered the city, they heard the noise and shouting coming from the squares that adorned the entire city with a variety of fabrics and colors. It was then that the young man sighed and said to the old man,
Avi, it was in these places that I began my search.
Then the old man stared at him and said,
To find a suitable partner or advisor, you must follow an elementary guideline. A good counselor must be busy in the affairs of his profession so that he becomes a specialist in his art, avoiding meddling in what he does not understand or master. A good sailor must be in his ship, on the waters of the sea, spinning sails in order to set sail.
They then passed through the crossroads, where they came across the bars and canteens that resembled cells, where their prisoners were exhibited. And at every step of their ride, they came face to face with another of their prisoners, who, with outstretched hands, offered to help them on their journey in exchange for a glass of wine. At that moment, the old man said to the young man,
Was it in this place that the man who deceived you came to meet you? Well, well, my son, a good counselor cannot be found in places where rivalry, greed, and confusion abound. For every wise man is wise, therefore he shines among others. In the same way, you must only keep your feet on the right path, always preserving your integrity. Only then will the good counselor come to meet you.
Beyond the squares and crossroads, they finally came to a quiet place, away from the shouting and gossip of the crowd, where they sought lodging. Finding it, they drew up their steeds and led them to the stable lodge, where they would rest from their strenuous journey. Tired, the old man said to the young man,
Tomorrow at dawn we will leave for the oil fields. See that you get some rest, my son.
So saying, he took his leave and went to his room. The young man then turned away, and opening the door of his room, threw himself on his cot. And wearied with his journey, he brooded until he fell asleep. The young man awoke before dawn, with great determination to make his journey prosperous. So, shaking his head, he stretched his body and rose to his feet, and leaving his chamber, he bathed in the waters of the river Adar and returned to his room. On his return, Avi came out to meet him, with the steeds already saddled and ready to depart. The young man kept silent and looked at the old man with a smile.
Hello, my son,
the old man began.
We are to set out now for the clay fields, which are only a few stadia away.
The young man nodded and quickly mounted his steed. Having done so, the two set off, hastening to the clay pits. It was not long before the old man and the young man came in sight of the clay pits, which were filled with heavily guarded caravans. Alongside the caravans, they also saw their workers frantically striving to extract clay, transport it, and transform it into the best pottery in the region. As they galloped along, they met all sorts of men who, with outstretched hands, offered clay already quarried, each one trying to shout louder than his competitor. This frenzied atmosphere aroused in the young man all sorts of doubts and fears as to whether he would finally succeed in his journey. But the old man remained unperturbed, galloping on in spite of the loud shouting of the crowd. Then the young man, with a voice like a trumpet, called out to the old man, saying,
Avi, my father, I fear we shall fail again, for how shall we distinguish the good counselor in the noise of so many men?
Then the old man, clearing his throat, said to the boy,
You will never achieve more than you hope for, my boy. If you put fear in your way, being afraid of yourself, there is little for you in the way of life. Therefore, triumph in the battle within you. If you succeed, its reward will not be long in manifesting itself in the eyes of others. Have confidence, boy, and ever shall your pilgrimage be prosperous.
Having said this, they came upon a quieter area, where under tents, foremen and caravan owners were gathered to listen to those who claimed to be experts in the exploration of new deposits. Then the old man turned and said to the young man,
"We have come to the place where our search begins."
Then they alighted from their steeds and led them to the stable behind the tents. Having done this, the old man said to the young man,
"Follow me, for we will go from tent to tent, so that we may listen attentively and be able to distinguish who is to be our advisor."
So they hurried into a tent that was full of distinguished men, who were listening attentively to a man named Dov. This man spoke to the crowd, saying,
"My associates and I have found a place where the remnants of clay and marble are left unguarded by the merchants. For at the end of their journey they cannot be carried by the capacity of their caravans. Those who go with me during the night will no longer have to toil extracting such wealth, for they will fill their asses with the wealth that we will find before our eyes. Behold, we will take it without being seen."
So saying, a great murmur was heard in the crowd, and Avi gently took the young man by the shoulder and with a distrustful gesture beckoned him out of the tent. Once outside, the old man said to the boy,
"Would you accept the counsel and society of such a man as Dov?"
The young man replied,
No, sir, for like him I would not keep my integrity, and sooner or later I would fall.
"Well, very well. Let us go to the next tent."
Entering the next tent, they found another crowd listening to a man called Yeh. Listening attentively, the man said,
"Today I speak to all of you distinguished colleagues, for I have the best offer available to you. You only have to invest a few coins, and we will start the exploration as soon as possible in a deposit that only I know. With my help, you will find a land where much more than clay flows, whose stones are marble, and from whose mountains you will be able to extract copper. It is a place where there is more white sapphire than earth, and like stream stones you will find all kinds of precious minerals."
So saying, the whole crowd shouted at the top of their voices and urged him to receive gold and silver from them. Then the old man looked at the boy and said,
"Are you excited, Raphael?"
No, sir. I will not take for my partner the flatterer and the pretentious. My feet have already been close to the one who offers much for little. I will not again fall prey to the shenanigans of one who is inclined to exaggeration."
"Very well, my son, well said."
So saying, they went out of the tent. And so it was, as they went from tent to tent, that the old man and the young man distinguished those whom they would not take for partners or advisers. For before their eyes were shown those who, with lies, sought to deceive the leaders of the caravans. However, their patience did not reach its limit until a man named Nabal appeared before them. This man had little understanding of the limits to be crossed for profit. This time, the old man and the boy, with one accord and without so much as a word, left the tent. They were tired from their search and went to look among the tents for a place to eat to regain their strength. Then they found before them a large tent, inside of which were many caravan leaders who were discussing matters of exploration while they were eating. Then the old man said to the young man in a voice that betokened weariness and expectation,
"Come, let us sit down and listen attentively to all the diners. We shall soon find the one we have been looking for."
"Yes, sir,"
said the boy. As they sat down, they began to listen to one of the caravan leaders, who in a loud voice said,
"None of these men is like Yahalom, a wise and prudent man, who knows how to guard the affairs of those who invest with him. Why should we be led astray by unknown men, inclined to exaggeration and certainly to lies?"
Then many other chiefs interrupted, saying,
"Why should we walk when we can run with them? We know this man who is never anxious to be rich."
Then another caravan leader interrupted those who raised their voices in the crowd, saying,
"Comrades, do not forget that these men who have come before us are anxious to become rich, and for this reason they are entangled in snares and temptations. Let us not listen to their trickery, lest we also go down with them in ruin and perdition."
Then, as the quarrel between them continued, Avi touched the boy's shoulder gently, and in his ear said,
"Now the truth has come out. We have at last found a trustworthy man."
With that said, they left the tent in haste. On their way out, they wandered around, asking for Yahalom. Time passed, and after a long time of searching, they felt tired, and coming upon a row of oaks, they stopped under the lushest of them to rest. Lying there, both the young man and the old man, in an attempt to regain their strength, kept silent, looking towards the horizon. After a short rest, they were met by a man with a dark complexion and snow-white hair.
"What can I do for you?"
he said as he arrived.
"We have been looking for you with insistence, for we have heard of your great reputation when it comes to the exploration of new pottery deposits.
the young man said enthusiastically. Then Yahalom frowned.
Let me tell you that exploration is no easy task. Undoubtedly, once a new site is found, the rewards must be immense. However, many succumb to helplessness and fail without understanding that the treasures are hidden, and only those who persist will find them. They will never find what they seek unless they can overcome anxiety, worry, and fear.
The young man and the old man nodded in agreement, and the young man rose to his feet in elation and said aloud,
Avi, my father! We have found the one we have been so earnestly seeking. What words can I use to thank you?
Yahalom stepped back.
I propose that you refrain from thanking me for now. Whatever help I give you, it will be as a mere brick in comparison to the walls we will have to move to reach our goal.
We will proceed according to your advice, I give you my word.
This time it was Avi who, staring at Yahalom, was encouraged to intervene.
Then let us begin. Tomorrow at sunrise we will begin our exploratory work. Therefore see to it that you return and stock yourselves with provisions and sufficient gold, which we will use to begin our task,
said Yahalom. So the old man and the young man returned to their lodging place, marveling at Yahalom's wisdom, waiting patiently to see whether they had prospered in their journey or not. Kadmiel receives the 3 commandments from his grandfather. Hours had passed when Raphael returned to the present, and he could see his grandson Kadmiel staring at him. After a short pause, he said,
Kadmiel, and so it was that Avi, my associate, and I finally found the right advisor. Yahalom's warnings were fulfilled, for we required much work and time to find the deposits, but his help was invaluable. For not only did we find what we were looking for, but our most ambitious plans were realized. Nevertheless, my son, the value of a good counselor, I reaffirmed it even more during the exploration of a new deposit. That day was different from others, as torrential rains lashed our camp, causing a major landslide. Thanks to Yahalom, we were able to retreat before the masses of rock, earth, and debris slid down a slope and reached our location. When the event was over, we began to remove the debris, and suddenly a small chest slid by my feet. Then suddenly I took it in my arms and carried it to where Yahalom was. Seeing me with the chest in my hands, he said to me, "So you have found a treasure. You will be lucky as long as you keep it with you." So I took it with me and kept it in the place where I was staying with your grandmother. That same night, on arriving in my room, I placed the small chest at the foot of my bed and carefully removed the weeds from the outside of it. Then I carefully removed the leather wrappings. Suddenly, its lid opened expeditiously, and on inspecting within I beheld a parchment, and behind it something that gleamed with great brilliancy. Then I reached in to pull out the parchment and read what was written upon it. The parchment yielded easily to the pressure of my fingers, and as I carefully scrutinized it, I could see that it was written in golden letters. However, at its end, it was too worn and faded to be legible. Then, with great anticipation, I began to read the parchment. As I did so, I could understand the reason why even the strongest have fallen wounded, and why even the wisest have died in their mistakes. For wisdom is the power to discern what must be done, and to put it into practice no matter what the obstacles. Yet it is not only enough to discern the right things to do and to desire to do them. For even the greatest rulers, in all their glory and splendor, have not been wise enough to know what ought to be done, and strong and able enough to act in accordance with this knowledge. Wherever you go, you will always find men who boast of knowing what they ought to do, but who err in acting in total disagreement with that knowledge. That then is the sad story of every man who, like your grandfather, has to know what is good, but acts in disagreement. If only I had endeavored to keep the counsel of Yahalom and sought the solution to the problem posed by the scroll, I am sure that my fate would have been different and my end would have been full of glory. After reading that scroll, I returned to the chest and continued to scrutinize it to discover where the glow I had seen came from. Then I reached into it and pulled out of the chest a small white pebble, beautiful in a great way. On examining it carefully, I could see that it reflected a cold, silvery light which attracted my attention. The next day, as soon as I could, I went to the village jeweler, and after carefully examining the stone, it turned out to be a white sapphire. This news made me feel very fortunate, so I tried very hard to sell it, but its value was priceless. As you can see, my dear apprentice, as soon as I knew the value of the stone, instead of keeping it, I wanted to exchange it or sell it. How wrong of me! In the same way, my son, when I had attained wealth and success, in my desire for greater prowess, I dispensed with Avi, my faithful counselor, who had been my safe refuge for long years. I forgot, therefore, that in finding him, I had indeed found a treasure. I forgot that his friendship was priceless, and that there is no weight to measure its value. That is why I say that it is no use knowing what to do, if in the end you succumb to the contrary desires that rule you. Then, in time, I also forgot the chest and the pebble inside it. In the blink of an eye the years went by, and with them my opportunities to return to my old path and to appreciate anew the true value that lay inside that chest vanished. Today I understand that no one can make wisdom his own by what he reads, unless he meditates insistently on reading it. The scroll and its teaching remained in the chest for many years, and with them vanished my opportunity to apply the wisdom contained in its golden letters.
At the time, the old man's eyes were filled with sadness and helplessness as he told this story. So it was very easy for Kadmiel to pause for a moment on the old man's face, and with a certain indulgence to wait patiently for his grandfather to resume his narrative. After sighing, the old man stared at Kadmiel, and as he looked at him, he saw that there was neither helplessness nor even wonder in his eyes, only innocence and immense curiosity, which were focused on the outcome of his story. Then the old man continued.
Recently, during this time of convalescence, I had time to search through my memories, and in sifting through my possessions, I found again the chest which for years I had forgotten, and of which I did not know its whereabouts. When I opened it again, I could see inside the parchment and the little white stone. And today, more than ever, my dear grandson, I have understood that, like the little stone, partners and advisers are neither bought nor sold. On the contrary, they must be kept for life. See to it then, my dear apprentice, that when they arrive they never leave. Retain these words well if you want to grasp the truth that you will find in the parchment, and not repeat the story of your grandfather, and in the end regret it.
At that moment, the young Kadmiel clapped his hands with enthusiasm and said to his grandfather,
"Will you entrust me with the chest that you have kept for so many years?"
The old man smiled faintly and nodded with a frail nod of his head. And he raised his arm in approval and went on,
You will attain all the development of which you are capable if you are determined to guard the wisdom in the chest as the greatest of your treasures. Moreover, if as a true apprentice you determine to find the missing portion of the scroll, you will find with it the way that I could not find, and you will be prosperous in your journey, and all that you undertake will go well with you."
At the same moment the old man stood up and said to Kadmiel,
"I will be back in a few minutes with the chest which I have entrusted to you."
When he was in his room, Raphael quickly looked for the chest. He opened his wardrobe, and after finding it, he carefully took it out, holding it in his arms. He then removed the dust from its surface and carefully opened it and placed inside the white pebble he had shown Kadmiel. After a short time of waiting, Kadmiel saw his grandfather emerge from his room with a chest in his arms. Staring into his eyes as he walked towards him, his grandfather's gaze was intense and silently confessing how precious his possession was. As he sat down, the old man said,
"Now I want you to promise me one thing, Kadmiel."
Kadmiel looked at him with great curiosity, so Raphael decided to do everything in his power to make sure Kadmiel didn't make the same mistakes.
"From now on, keep the 3 commandments that I will give you. Do not turn from them right or left. Can you promise?"
"Yes, I can do that, but I would like to hear them from your mouth first."
Become an apprentice every day of your life. Never do without good friends, partners, and advisers. Keep them as treasures. For nothing exchange their friendship. For like this white pebble, their value is priceless, and with their wisdom you will not only achieve your goals, but your paths will be affirmed. Remember that if you carefully guard a treasure, in time it will increase in value. Finally, keep the wisdom that lies in the scroll, that thou mayest keep thyself humble during the days of thy pilgrimage. Lay hold of humility, perchance thou mayest find grace before thy Maker, and he will cross thy path, and from his mouth thou mayest discover the portion that is needed.
Having said this, the old man continued to look at Kadmiel, with a look that pierced him, and adding nothing more, Kadmiel was filled with enthusiasm and said,
Is that all you ask?
It is enough to make you a prosperous and distinguished man.
Having said this, the old man sighed with a great sigh of relief, as if he had been relieved of an enormous burden. While this was happening, his smile had changed, for it showed a great satisfaction, as of one who has completed his career, carrying out his mission. At that moment, the old man caressed Kadmiel's face with his hands and said,
Take the chest, put it away carefully, and when I am gone, search what is inside.
Kadmiel did not try to repress his sadness, as he took the chest, and holding it in his arms said to his grandfather,
Where are you going, my dear grandfather?
At the same moment, his grandmother Batya came up, accompanied by 2 men. His grandfather replied,
These men are to take me to a special place to look after me during my convalescence.
Kadmiel could not hold back his tears, and he threw himself into his grandfather's arms, and lifting his face to him said,
Promise me that you will come back, my dear grandfather.
Then his grandfather said to him,
I bid you farewell for a short time, but remember what I have told you, that you may succeed, and that you and your future companion may, in time, share all the happiness that the future will bring.
With that said, the old man stood up, and together with his grandmother Batya, they walked away from the boy's sight, down the stairs. After this, Kadmiel carefully put the chest away, eagerly awaiting his grandfather's return. Kadmiel opens the chest. Many days had passed, and Kadmiel still had no news from his grandfather. One day, however, at sunset, as he was looking out of the balcony, he saw his mother, absorbed before his eyes, as one who had received some disconcerting news. He hurried down the stairs and went out to meet her, for he suspected that something strange was happening to her. When he was in front of her, his mother suddenly took him in her arms and hugged him tightly. Between sobs, his mother said to him,
My son, your grandfather has been called by his maker, so you will see him no more.
Kadmiel could not hold back the tears that ran down his cheeks as he lay in his mother's arms. After that long embrace, his mother looked at Kadmiel and said,
Always remember your grandfather's teachings, for they are the product of his experience. Therefore, get up now, eat and regain your strength, for your journey is just beginning. Therefore, from now on, strive until you attain that for which you have been created.
So saying, Kadmiel arose, ate, and having regained his strength, returned to his room. When he was in his room, he sat down on his bed and gazed intently at the chest containing the possessions his grandfather had entrusted to him. Next, Kadmiel walked slowly to the chest, and with his hands carefully opened it. Reaching into it, he pulled out the parchment that rested inside, and gently unrolled it. Having unrolled it wide open, he finally took courage and glanced at the scroll. Its letters were golden, and at the end it was badly worn, so much so that its contents could not be read. Then he began to read.
I know there is nothing good in my old nature. Well, even though I want to do good, I cannot. When I want to do good, I don't do it. And when I try not to do bad, I do it anyway. So, if I do what I don't want to do, it is clear what the problem is. It is the evil that lives in me. So, wanting to do good, I am confronted with this law. Evil lives in me. In my inner self, I would like to obey the will of God. But I realize that in the members of my body there is another law, which is the law of evil. This law is at war with my mind and holds me captive. How sad is the state I am in? Who will free me from the bondage of this mortal nature?
After reading, Kadmiel felt fear and doubt come over him, and his confidence deserted him. Then he closed his eyes, leaned against the wall, and exclaimed in a loud voice,
Can I overcome this bondage mentioned in the parchment? It would be foolish of me to believe that I can overcome this nature, if even my grandfather, with his great wisdom and experience, could not do so. Therefore, I must carefully search for the missing part of this scroll, for a powerful enemy has appeared before me, who threatens to imprison my future. Behold, only in this way will I prevent my actions from being governed by greed, fear, doubt, and all manner of passions and vices. Today I am determined to diligently seek the answer to this riddle, which has only been rightly answered by those who have armed themselves with true humility. And how am I to achieve this? I will achieve it through a humility that will even lead me to change my nature. Humility will be the open door through which this new nature within me must enter. Only in this way will I achieve my grandfather's design. Today, I determine with humility to become an apprentice among men. Every teaching I receive in a company with enough humility to make it my own will have the power to change my skin beyond recognition because I will become someone new. Today, I determine with humility to become an apprentice among men, and so very soon the missing part of the scroll will come into my hands.
Having said this, Kadmiel threw himself on his bed, and weary from the day, he sobbed himself to sleep.